Greetings all, and welcome to Lucas Brews, and part 3 of the Italeri 1/72 scale Ju87 G-2 Stuka with the cannons build video. So previously I've done the painting and also the assembly in 2 separate videos, so if you haven't seen that, go check it out. In today's video we'll be finishing up the kit with a little bit of weathering, and I'll give my final thoughts and conclusions after having built this kit. So, without further ado, let's do some weathering. Before I apply the white winter coat over the upper surfaces of the aircraft, I use a very fine brush and some Tamiya XF16 flat aluminium to create some metal chipping on the base layer of paint. I use the fine brush to dab the paint onto areas that would be exposed to the airflow, such as the leading edges of the wings, the horizontal and vertical stabilizers, and also on the edges of the spinner. I also apply a fair bit of metal chipping on the walkway where the pilot and gunner would frequently be standing to get in and out of the aircraft, along some of the recessed panel lines, especially ones which would be simulating the hatches and access ports, which would likely get damaged or chipped during maintenance, and on some of the other areas that move, such as the flaps, control surfaces, and the radiators. Once I'm satisfied with my metal chipping, I soften the effect a little bit by painting a bit of RLM 70 and 71 on some of the larger areas of chipping. As well as softening the effect and reducing how much metal is exposed, it also creates the illusion of the layer of paint being on top of the metal chipping, thus making it look a little bit more realistic on the edges. And getting into the exciting part, I used a bit of enamel XF2 flat white from Tamiya and mixed it with a bit of X20 enamel thinners to help thin the paint down, and then I used a relatively fine brush to dab it onto the areas where the instructions said the whitewash was applied. I didn't really have a fixed ratio for how much paint and thinners I used. I simply added a little bit of extra white if I wanted my white sort of snowy patterns to appear a little bit denser and show through less of the green, and I mixed them with a little bit of thinner if they were getting a little bit too thick and gloopy from the paint. I made sure to apply the white dots with a dabbing motion to help create a little bit of randomness and make the edges of them quite messy. This is because the white winter coats would have been applied in the field, sometimes with stuff as basic as a broom or even some wet rags. The paint itself would have been a washable pigment which was designed to come off with a little bit of water, and as such would have been very prone to weathering. It was considering all these factors that led me to decide to use the enamel for the white winter wash, because it meant that I could later on, as you'll see, use a bit of X20 thinners to remove the excess white from some of the areas where I'd done the metal chipping to create some extra weathering on the white layer which wouldn't interact with the acrylic paints underneath. I haven't actually seen anyone else use this method to apply a winter whitewash camo, but I'd be very interested to know what other people's techniques are as well. This is one that I kind of came up with, and I was pretty excited to give it a go, and I'm really happy with the results I managed to achieve with it. After the white had been applied, I used a cotton tip and some X20 enamel thinners to remove the excess white from the leading edges of the wing and along the walkway, which would likely get scratched off by the crew as they walked or by various debris in the air as the aircraft flew along. I also removed it from the area behind the exhaust, which would have had a lot of heat, and as you'll see later I also do some smoke effects, and then I used a fine brush to remove it from the edges of access hatches which would likely get chipped during maintenance. And once the enamel thinners had dried, I then used some black Tamiya panel liner scent to create some streaking effects coming out of the various access hatches, the fuel ports, the radiators, and also to create a little bit of a darker kind of greasy weathering effect on the landing gear. After it had dried, I then used a bit of X20 thinners to remove the excess and to amplify the streaking effect by dragging it backwards in the direction of the airflow before it was time to add some smoke effects. I used the black Tamiya weathering powder to dab some pigment onto the edges of the muzzle brakes from the cannons to create some gun smoke, and also in a sort of swirling motion streaking backwards to create the exhaust smokes. I also added a little bit of extra leaking coming out of the fuel tanks and on the radiators. Some white weathering powder was used to create a slight burning effect coming from the immediate area aft of the exhausts, and I also used a little bit of rust to mix in with the coolant coming from the radiator to add a little bit more to the leaking effects, and to add a little bit of dirt on the landing gear and where the walkway was for the crew. I applied a few coats of the lighter sand pigment onto the wheel by applying it with the brush, removing the excess and then repeating until I was happy with the consistency and the streaks I had. A little bit of extra dirt effects were applied on the underside of the aircraft close to the landing gear, as if the aircraft had been operating on a dirt strip, and also a little bit of lighter dirt on the walkway. And with the weathering completed, I turned my attention to some of the smaller accessories such as the antenna, which I finally glued on since I'd finished the painting and was now less likely to damage it, although I did still manage to split it in half while trying to put it into the cockpit. I put the tail wheel back on, which fell off during the painting phase, and then I painted the counterbalances RLM65 before gluing them onto the underside of the wings, the machine gun flat aluminium and black, the exhausts X31 titanium gold, and after giving the exhausts and the machine gun a coat of Tamiya black panel liner scent and sticking them onto the aircraft, the Italeri Ju87 G-2 Stuka was finally completed. And here you can see the finished aircraft, taken by a professional photographer and a good friend of mine, Karl, who also works at the Queensland Air Museum with me. Although this kit does have a few negative points, namely the lack of cockpit detail for the side and also some of the details, for me most prominently the anti-slip area for the crew is not really done in the plastic, it's actually a decal, which I didn't really like. But apart from that, the kit isn't too expensive, it goes together really easily and really well, it's a lot of fun, and I'm also, on the whole, really happy with how my paint scheme turned out, since it was the first time I've ever attempted to do a winter wash scheme on a German aircraft. In my inbox review I did of the Italeri Stuka before building it, I compared it negatively towards the Academy kit, although after having built it, I have to say the gap between them doesn't seem quite as big. They're both pretty much the same price point, although I still think the Academy kit has some nicer details, especially for the cockpit and just in general with the recessed panel lines and especially the little radio receiver behind the rear gunner. So though the Italeri kit is not the best in 1/72nd scale in my opinion, it's still a really good kit and definitely worth the price. I would highly recommend it to beginners, and if you're someone who's got a lot of patience and is willing to spend a bit of time upgrading a kit to make it look a bit better, it's still a really good platform for that. But that's it for this video. I do hope you enjoyed it and got something out of it. If you did, please be sure to leave a like, and also feel free to leave any quips and positive feedback in the comment section down below. And a massive thank you to my wonderful patrons for helping me fund this video, for buying this kit, and many of the other projects that I'm currently working on. Big thanks as well to Karl for helping take the photos, and also Tectonic Hobbies for giving me a slight discount on this kit to help review for them. They're a little shop on the Sunshine Coast, which I also happen to work at, so if you fancy buying model kits and you live nearby, then please pop in. I've got plenty of projects that I'm currently working on, which has been keeping me very busy, including a inbox review for the 1/72nd scale Academy B24 and Martin Mariner, which were recently released. But until those videos, take care, and as always, model on.